I was always kind of curious about the past because my parents on our trips, we always pulled over at those brown historic preservation signs, historic point of interest here. So we'd always have to pull over. And often when we were going to visit my grandparents in New Mexico, we'd drive by all sorts of cool archaeology sites and we'd stop and get out and run around, parents, get your energy out, go run around. So that's how I kind of got interested in the past. And I got to see Pueblo people, and there was some Native American connective tissue there. And as a child at camps I went to around the Pacific Northwest. So I was always aware of Indian people and Native American communities. And so my interest kind of grew out of that. But in fifth grade, I got first place in the fifth grade science fair. And that same year, I got my Arrow of Light as a Weeblo in the Boy Scouts. I didn't ever go past that, but I got it in record time. And so I learned two things. One, I like science. Science was cool because you could get rewarded for it. And all I did was get a little trophy.
Hey,
and then the second, yeah, exactly. Do I still have that? I do. I still have it. Here's my, I'll have to put it in front of me or it won't show up, but here's my fifth grade Olympic View Elementary. Let's see if I can get to show science. Well, no, I can't quite get it to go. There we go. 19, date myself there, 1972.
Oh, that's amazing that you still have it.
Outstanding exhibit. But, I didn't do too well in my first 2 years of college, as many students experience. And
Me
so
too.
I regrouped in community college and finished out my general university requirements. And I was sitting on some steps and somebody from the community college newspaper came by and interviewed me like, where are you going to go after you get your AA degree? And I was like kind of caught surprised, and I was just sitting there thinking about what did I really like in high school. And I had an anthropology class, and I was like, I think I'm going to do anthropology. I have a little cutout of that article because that was like the beginning. That was like the first time in my head, like anthropology is cool. So I transferred to Western Washington University. And I took a geology class, I took a chemistry class, and I took intro to archaeology. And I was just, I loved making observations. I loved the idea about going out into the field. I love the idea about discovery and finding something that hasn't been seen for hundreds or thousands of years. I remember when I picked up on my field school at the end of my time at Western, was on San Juan Island. It was a giant shell midden garbage heap of past Northwest Coast peoples, Lummi Indians there. And there were these steps cut up through the shell midden that the park had made, and they built a wood structure over them. And I remember looking under there at the shell, and I grabbed this piece of rock, and it was a piece of fire cracked rock, which there are literally tons of in a shell midden. But I remember holding that, go, wow, somebody had this in a fire. Who knows how long ago? And I remember talking to my fellow students about that, and we were all like going, yeah, wow, what else will we find? And it was the most common, boring artifact you can find on the planet. But that moment, I was so excited and so happy about that. That kind of like connection with the past. And so I was hooked into science and social science at that point.
The next question for you is, so regarding your research, why do you think it's relevant, or how is it relevant, and what are the broader societal impacts that you believe?
So, as we went into this pandemic and before the Black Lives Matter movement, and before we were putting together the Northwest Anthropology Conference for 2020 that we didn't get to do, I felt like the relevance of my research was that I was generating scientific knowledge. So it was based on observations, based on empirical data, and that could be used in a court of law or in trying to understand pre-contact people's industries and technologies, in particular with stone tools, and that information could be used to both benefit society as a whole about how have people in the past, kind of as an example with the record that I produce about the past, how have people interacted with their environment in mostly successful ways. The unsuccessful ways don't even, you know, they're not around long enough to leave much of an archaeological record. So most of the archaeological record is the successful ways with which people adapted to, worked with, were modified by themselves, their behavior and their biology by their environment. And we have such problems with our interaction with environments and thinking that we are, you know, literally God's gift to the planet. And that kind of mentality drives a lot of our resource management decisions, which I think is very problematic, that we somehow have a right to these resources, regardless of who was here before us, which we know are our Native American community partners that were here before us. And even it became clear to me that maybe even the archaeological record I was generating, the knowledge about that record, could be used by those communities as a testimonial of their usual and accustomed practices. Now, I said that once in front of a bunch of Native Americans at an archaeology day at the Wanapum, and I was quickly schooled by one of the Native American community members there that they don't need an archaeologist telling them about what their past use, life, land use ways were. They know exactly what those were. And that was a big eye opener to me, that I needed to kind of rethink about how I was packaging the significance of my work, the relevance of my work. And it became clear to me that I needed to think about it in terms of working with Native American communities. We talk about the difference between preservation and conservation. And preservation is, like, I call it the shellac effect. You want everything to stay the same, right? You enslave it, essentially, is the root of that French word from preserver. Conservation, on the other hand, is actually working with the stuff, working with the plants, with the animals. If we look at the picture behind us at Iceberg Point, you can see that forest. You almost see it move towards the coast, right? It's encroaching in these areas that were camas beds that at least 5 tribes today use this area. And there's evidence from the fire scars on trees in this area that until European settlement in the islands, that these areas, this end of the island, burned regularly between 12 and 15 years over several hundred years. And that was people burning back that forest. Well, that doesn't happen anymore with fire suppression. And so the Bureau of Land Management, who's charged with managing this part of the San Juan Island National Monument, wants to do something about the invasives that are encroaching in this area. And so one of my students wrote up an ethnographic landscape analysis of this. And the whole idea all along was to work with Native communities to get this place healthy again. And I can see now we got stopped by locals on the island that were not Native. And we had full support of the Native communities to do the work here. But in working with them, I realized that there was a much more valuable thing happening here, much more relevant, which was me using my expertise to facilitate the work that Native people want to have done. So today, I'm trying to rethink about the relevance of what I do and how do I package this and not repeatedly stick my academic foot in my mouth, which is so hard for me because I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't brought up that way as a scientist. I've not been told, I wasn't trained that Native voice is important to doing my science. And I see now that was wrong. That was a huge gap in my education. And so I'm having to learn the hard lesson now of I'm not going to be as effective unless I figure out how to do this differently. So collaborating, telling the truth, and letting what healing needs to happen is that kind of restorative justice steps that I see myself taking for the rest of my employment at CWU and beyond when I start to get to do archaeology again. But what I'm going to do is try and connect with and weave into Native communities to, make my knowledge about how to do scientific archaeology available to them if they find that useful. Try and undo some of the damage that's been done by, kind of thoughtless or mindless execution of scientific archaeology as cultural resource management. So I think we have work to do there. I take responsibility for the work I've done, and I'm going to continue to improve how I do that work and make sure that my students understand that and that history and the importance of understanding that.
Well, you're leading by example, because that's what my research will hopefully continue.
Exactly. I love your research.
Great. So my final question for you today. So if you could go back in time and give advice to your college self, what would that advice be?
Pay attention to the people that you're studying.
That's, simple, succinct, and I think everybody would benefit from that.
I mean, what are we doing in the social sciences if we're not doing that?
Exactly. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for CWU Science Stories. So I will let you go, but thank you again, and for sharing all of your knowledge and your science story and your fun trophy, which was so fun to look at.